And we're all at the beautiful location of the AgileThought. Just because you can't see our pretty pictures enough, here we are again. So welcome. And if we move on, just to give you a little overview, you may have heard this before if you've joined us in the past, but AgileThought is really accustomed to working in a remote way. So this isn't our sweet spot, but we have over 6 countries that we're in with just over or around 3,000 individuals that we work together with and collaborate with. And we started doing this way back in 2000. And what I love about AgileThought is I consider us a one-stop shopping experience where for your Agile needs and software needs. So our Transform practice where Quincy, Sam, and I reside, we provide that strategic transformation or Agile coaching and training support to help everybody on their journeys as they begin or are in flight. Then we have a division called the Build practice, and they're there to support your software needs, to partner in collaboration on developing some custom software or whatever you need. We have a lot of expertise in different domains. And last but not least is our run operations, which there to support you once you go live and are in production, and you may want somebody else to do some of the carrying with you. So there we are. Just for those who may be new, we are doing this as part of the virtual community header, and you'll see invites coming out from Eventbrite and different, if you're on our website or our blog site, you'll see AgileThought hosting these talks. And so it starts out today as an event forum where we talk about a general topic of interest, and then that's followed by more in-depth conversations, or what we refer to as practice talks, on actually equipping you to help hopefully address some of the challenges you may be facing. And I think the next slide is Zoom. I'm not seeing it. Oh, sorry. The next slide was in Zoom. Okay, the next type is the how the event is going to flow today. And again, to reiterate, we're doing resolving anti-patterns in the remote work world. So the conversation flow will be just talking about what is an anti-pattern. Then we're going to talk about are there some anti-patterns that you guys are seeing, not only from an Agile perspective, but maybe those that are coming to light now that you're working in a remote work world way. And then maybe zeroing in, since that is our reality, a little bit deeper on those anti-patterns that are in fact happening as part of working remote.
Hey, you want to go in the back with Johnny?
We're going to go ahead and talk about, are there opportunities for how we can make some attempts to address or stop or resolve those anti-patterns. So we're going to get creative together and collaborate. And I love this part. Quincy's going to take us on an I Spy game, which is going to be very helpful in reinforcing those subjects as we move towards wrapping up the session. And just for those who may not know it, we do record these sessions just so that we can share it with you and others who may be facing a similar challenge.
Yeah.
Okay, with that, next
it
slide.
Happens, right?
Yeah, and I just realized I could mute, so I did. Okay, you're going, okay. We like to start off every event with a working agreement. So if possible, we understand it's up to you, or we invite you to turn on your camera just so we can get a deeper connection, but we understand that may not work for everyone. So as you are comfortable with, please, if you don't mind, turn on your camera. We're going to be having a collaborative discussion, so just asking people to give each other space to speak up, as well as, being mindful of how we talk to one another and maybe the tone that we use. And we're going to ask for grace. We're all in this new remote world, so when we hear children or dogs or whatever in the background, that's just our new reality, and that's okay. It just makes the conversation interesting. We're going to teach you some Zoom practices if you're not familiar, to help you mute and let us know that you need our attention by using the hands up. And the intention here is just to share and learn together. So there we go. Now off to Sam, who's going to take us through using Zoom.
Thanks, Andrea. So the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your main screen has some tools that you'll be able to use. The mute button, little microphone. Please keep your mic muted when or unmute as appropriate. If you are on a Windows machine, you can use Alt-A to toggle the mute. Likewise, as Andrea said, we'd like to have you share your video. It makes for a deeper connection. You can use Alt-V to toggle your video on and off, and then the chat window has a little balloon, word balloon with 3 buttons in the balloon, and if you pop that open, I'll be monitoring that so that you can use that to make sure that your voice is heard. Please note that you can direct message somebody by clicking in the clicking where it says everyone, drop down, will list everybody that's on the call, and they will be the only person that sees what you're looking for, what you've said. If you're looking to talk to everybody, please select everyone. And then finally, use the raise hand button next to your name in the participants window to indicate that you'd like to speak if you're having trouble getting your voice heard. We want to make sure that everybody has a chance to participate, and I'll be monitoring that as well to make sure that we hear all voices that want to be heard. That's it for Zoom. I will now hand things over to our speaker, Quincy Jordan. Take it away, Quincy.
All right, great. Thanks, Sam. So excited to get into the topic for today, which is resolving anti-patterns in remote work. All right, so what is an anti-pattern? So an anti-pattern is a common response to a recurring problem that is usually ineffective and risks being highly counterproductive. So the term was coined in 1995 by Andrew Coyne, was inspired by a book, Design Patterns, which highlights a number of design patterns in software development that its authors consider to be highly reliable and effective. So many of us run into anti-patterns, and we see anti-patterns in many of the things that we do. And so, excuse me, sometimes, I kind of look at it and I say, okay, well, is this really just another way to say insanity? Is this another way that we hit our heads up against a brick wall trying to do things? And almost, but not exactly. So it is very similar, and it is doing the same thing again, but it's kind of in a more focused way, and it's often with good intent, but it's layered with displaced determination. And displaced determination is a it's a phrase that I came up with that some relatives inspired me to do, because I would see the level of effort that would be made towards something that was very earnest, but just very displaced at times as well. So as we are talking about anti-patterns, we want to keep in mind the values of the Agile Manifesto. So when we're talking about this, think about these things, have this in the back of your mind: individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software or working product over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. All right, so some typical Agile anti-patterns are skipping retrospectives in Scrum, adding stage gates for governance, team members acting in silos, and there are many, many others out there. So what are 2 Agile anti-patterns that you have seen, and what was the impact, and how were they resolved? So take a few moments and just really think about that, and feel free to put 2 of those in the chat, along with what the impact was and how it was resolved. So we'll look in the chat and we'll pick some of those and we'll actually discuss them, and we want to hear from you.
Okay, got something coming in from chat.
Right, and while we have a couple of others that look like they may be typing some in, so Judine shared retrospectives. Resolution was incorporating concept board for team collaboration and retrospective training. Can you tell us a bit more about what that experience was like, Judine?
Sure, absolutely. I think when I first started with facilitating some of the sessions, it was I was on a new team as a Scrum Master, and we just kind of observing how they were doing the retrospective. And I think there was one person who would take notes and walk through different things. So, I just really asked the team, and actually we had one individual who was in a different location. So there's and I don't know if you all are familiar with Concept Board, but it is a virtual collaboration tool. So it allows everyone to move real time through the board. So what we did, we changed from kind of that one person updating, what we did yesterday, not what we did, excuse me, just kind of walking through, what worked well, what didn't work well. But we changed it to like retrospective hats where people can put in, they were like pre-filled questions. And it forced everyone to actually have to engage because they were all moving around in the concept board live. Then I also realized that, it was probably a knowledge opportunity for knowledge share, because I think a lot of them didn't really understand what the purpose overall of a retrospective is.
Nice, thanks.
Sure.
Sam, are there any others that are jumping out at you? Are you helping to review?
Sam, you're on mute.
So I am. So Michael put something together, reviews becoming more of a dog and pony show and less about showing working product, which makes stakeholders and attendees become disengaged.
Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah, tell us more about that, Mike.
Well, I just think that in general, it can be very difficult for teams to get that working software out there or working product. It could be, what if it breaks? What if it's, not perfect or whatever? And they tend to revert to, I'm going to put together a great PowerPoint presentation that shows all these great screenshots of everything that we did, instead of actually putting something working or doing a live demo, just because they want that confidence that it's going to go exactly as planned and nothing's going to go wrong. And, and at the same time, when you do that, that's that whole thing. Like, why are your stakeholders even there? Why are you inviting people to have a review? Because most of the time, the people who you were building this for have already seen it. It's not supposed to be the first time they ever see the finished product. So, when you just kind of ask the question of, so why are you having this review? Do you actually want feedback? And does this seem to be an engaging meeting to you? And like I said, so that's ways that I've gotten around it. I just record their retro or their review. And then in a retrospective, be like, okay, let's watch it and let's see what you all thought and how can we make this better? How could it be more engaging if you were actually an audience member and not the person on the other side?
Yeah, that's a really good point too, because it is definitely an anti-pattern at times for people to start thinking more in terms of a demo than they do a review. And it is actually really intended to be a review, not so much a demo. It's not that a demo is wrong, but if you get too tied into the demo type thinking, then you can, teams can sometimes really struggle with, well, if we don't have anything to demo, should we just cancel the review? And then that becomes an anti-pattern that causes a problem. So yeah, thanks. I appreciate that.
Carl also pointed out lack of action items in a retrospective. Can be an anti-pattern.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, talk about that, Carl.
Yeah, so I'm starting to notice a trend with a few of my teams where we will go through retro and we go anywhere from the 4Ls to Starfish to try to, see how we can improve ourselves. But once we go through all of those steps and it comes down to, okay, so what is the next step that we need to take? There are very limited action items that come out of those retros, for one. And then even if we do have action items from that retro, when we get to the next one, there's been no action taken on those items. So I think I think someone made a point earlier, is given a clear understanding of what retro really is and the steps in the process and the purpose of what retro is, and it is to improve yourselves. Should be all about continuous improvement, and the retro ceremony is one way to get that. And I think getting more involved with what we come up with as action items during retro would be more beneficial. We have also implemented something called a mid-sprint review, where we actually go back and see exactly where we are in our sprint and what's going to make it and what may potentially carry over. And also during that process of the mid-sprint review, we want to review our retro items and see where we are with focusing on those as well.
Nice. I'm just curious, who all is involved in that mid-sprint review? Is that the entire team or
just the entire team? It's something that we put in place to give our product owners more clarity on where they are. One of my challenges is, and I guess some of you may not know, I work with Internet Hotel groups. So my teams are non-IT teams, non-software teams. So they have the tendency to think that carryover is okay. And to me, it's not. So what I try to implement is a mid-sprint check-in to see what's going to make it and what's not, because if something carries over, then there has to be an impediment associated with it. So it's just a quick mid-sprint check-in to see where we are and to identify those things that may not carry over, and then reprioritize our backlog if need
be. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. All right. And
do we have time for a few other responses, Quincy?
Let's take maybe one more. Just want to make sure we don't run out of time for the other activities.
So Jim put a couple in. I'm going to just skip to the second one. The second example that he gives is people diving into too much detail in the daily scrum, which causes it to extend or people to feel rushed.
Really? Developers don't do that, do they? Yeah, tell us more about that, Jim.
Sorry, I was having some mute issue. What I noticed happened, the company I'm working with, we went to work from home about the second week in March, as a result of COVID-19, like many companies did, and some of the old habits emerged with their daily stand-ups, where they would go into either statusing, or they would go in and just give way too much detail on what they're working on. And it was taking a little bit too much time. And for people, and some of the people either had to rush through their updates, or they didn't get through everybody before time was up. And so what we ended up having to do was do a refresher with the individuals and go through and encourage a scrum master to use some tools to keep people moving along. When you're face-to-face, you got a lot of visible cues. And in video, you do have that luxury of using some video cues. But the video cues you use in video, maybe more in your face video cues, and not as subtle as when you're in a group and, people are, you're trying to get attention to the individual. You have different ways to get them moving on. With a limited number of icons in Zoom or some of the other tools like WebEx, it sure would be nice if you had that red, green, and yellow stoplight that they have in Toastmasters to turn a light on and say, okay, you're getting to the end here, wrap it up. So what our Scrum Masters do is they try to get in there and get the subjects or the speaker's attention and say, okay, you're detailing or you're solutioning, let's put it on the back burner, let's go to the next person. and they became a little bit more assertive.
Nice. Thanks for the share. Yeah, there was a Dave Chappelle sketch some time ago where he had a wrap it up button that you could use, and
I vaguely remember that.
yeah, and I actually found a wrap it up app that I used with a team a few years back. Yeah, everyone thought that was hilarious.
Oh, cool.
So yeah. All right, so we will continue on. All right, so resolving agile anti-patterns that are challenged by COVID-19 remote work. So when we're thinking about agile anti-patterns and to some degree anti-patterns in general, and we think about the values expressed in the manifesto, well, some of those things are actually being challenged now to even resolve those anti-patterns because of everyone being remote. So when we think about things like over-dependency on tools, because you can't have everyone remote without the tools, it just doesn't work. So tools now become the thing that really has to work well. Team members working more siloed. So it takes extra effort now to not work in more silos because, again, we're all remote. And then lack of face-to-face interaction. So we've all been there where now we're in situations where it's not as easy to even turn our cameras on sometimes. And it's understandable because our families are at home, everyone's at home, things are going on. So what are two agile anti-patterns you're seeing that are more challenging due to COVID-19 remote work? And I know, Jim, you mentioned, around the daily stand-up and people regressing, back into some old habits. But just think about, like the things that are really happening now that are challenging those agile anti-patterns being resolved. And what was the impact and how have they been resolved so far? So just like the last time, if you wouldn't mind sharing in the chat, and we'll pull from the chat and have some discussion about it.
There you have our first response from Michael. People just not used to working remotely, and so they're not being proficient with the technology.
So, Mike, how is that being overcome right now? What type of solutions are happening, or are solutions happening yet?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot. We're doing online working agreements with our teams. We're doing specific, let's talk about ways that we're going to work together remotely, how we're going to communicate, what kind of protocols that we're going to have in meetings, what tools we're even going to use, if it's in Teams or if it's in WebEx, or just really having those conversations. But then the other part is just as time goes by, people are getting used to it. But there's a whole lot of people that just never worked remote. They didn't even want to. So getting adjusted to, we're not looking up as many people's noses now. I should
Yeah, brings up an interesting point because, you know, the assumption sometimes has been that, well, you know, just make sure that people have, you know, Zoom or Teams, or, you know, make sure they have the technology and everyone gets on video and it's working. And, you know, it turns out, well, there's a bit more to it than that. Folks have to actually know how to interact, you know, in this way. And as you said, there are plenty of folks, you know, to many surprise, that don't want to work from home. You know, they enjoy, you know, being around others and having that interaction daily. And that in and of itself, you know, does cause, you know, some challenges. Yeah, so thanks for sharing, Mike.
I have actually been surprised by the number of people who don't have dedicated office spaces in their house. And I don't know why that surprised me. You know, I just assumed that everybody would set up a computer like I had and have it in a dedicated area of their house. And it seems like the majority of people I work with don't. And yeah, that was a revelation to me.
Yeah, and you know, I think about you know, it also can even, you know, have impact on how people were, you know, raised and so forth. And you know, I just remember my parents always saying, "Hey, when I come home, I don't want to bring work home with me," you know. And so while they did have home offices, it was still an environment of let's not bring work home. So those kinds of things could also carry over, you know, for people. And then I also think about like people in New York and, you know, the really densely populated areas where people have like 400 square foot bedroom apartments, you know, and like really close quarters where they just don't have that space. So that is, you know, a big consideration, and that's something that, you know, unfortunately, you know, some folks, you know, are having to deal with and figure out ways to work around that. Thanks for sharing, Mike. Do you have any others, Sam?
We do. Jim has pointed out he's seeing people rely more on email than some other form of more real-time communication, not wanting or not liking to talk on the phone or leveraging face-to-face for that immediate response, which is causing some problems with delay.
Cool, good. All right. All right, so for the sake of time, we will continue to move forward because I want to make sure that we do have time for our exercises that we're going to do. All right, so we are now going to play Anti-Pattern I Spy. All right, so is everyone familiar with I Spy? So I Spy with my little I think, or something like that. So what we will do is we have a scenario here, and I'll read the scenario and I'll leave it up for reference. But I want you to see if you can spot the anti-pattern, the agile anti-pattern in this case, and there may be more than one. And then if you spot it, what would be a proposed solution to that? So the Bumblebee team was moving along nicely for several sprints. They decided to improve their velocity further by not meeting for the sprint retrospective and using that time for development. After sprint 10, the throughput of the PBIs began to falter. They decided to use the MS Teams channel to share if someone had a problem. This continued for several more sprints, but the throughput continued to suffer. Does anyone spy? Feel free to just kind of blurt your answer out. You don't have to put it in the chat.
Skipping events.
Skipping events. So what would be a proposed solution to that?
Well, the importance about the retrospective is learning and continuing to learn and find better ways to do things. And if you're skipping that, then they're basically falling into a trap of doing some things the same way over and over and maybe not advancing their skills. You know, what I would do is encourage them to go back to the retro if they don't necessarily want to, if the team doesn't feel that it's needed after every sprint. I have seen teams successful with doing it every 2 sprints. But I really, the teams I've coached recently get a lot out of a retrospective, and it has a lot of other benefits too. It helps build trust because initially the first retrospective there wasn't a lot said, but when one person started sharing their thoughts, other people started catching on, and now it's a very good conversation that they have, and they identify action items and move on.
All right, thanks. Does anyone see any other anti-patterns there? So I'll give a hint. I believe there are at least 3.
How about they decided to use the MS Teams to share if someone else had a problem, as opposed to being self-organizing and working it out themselves?
All right, so I would say, excuse me, I would say for them to decide to use MS Teams was self-organizing, and they figured that part out themselves. However, the anti-pattern is that using the Teams channel cannot replace the sprint retrospective event. And that is the anti-pattern there, that the intent or the decision was, okay, well, if we just have a problem and we just share it in the chat, then that should help fix this. And that in and of itself really doesn't fix bringing the team together as one collective, so that you can have that sprint retrospective to really improve moving forward.
Hey Quincy, an additional perspective I had with that is I was thinking that they were using MS Teams to just communicate challenges they were having within the coding or the development of whatever they were working on. And I was, I guess I brought this up earlier, where instead of taking a form of more immediate communication by bringing it up to, in the stand-up and asking the question, or picking up the phone and calling, or at least using the chat portion, to ping people with that at the time, they elected to rely on the technology to inform others, which sometimes can be, the problem may not be stated clearly. Or in case of like Outlook, they were using Outlook. Sometimes Outlook has some challenges delivering messages in a timely fashion. But anyway, those were the things that's a perspective I was looking at it from. But the other perspective was very true.
Nice. Dan, do we have any others? I think I saw
Michael.
Raise.
Yeah, Michael.
Oh, I was just going to say that the thing I see that is an anti-pattern to me is they decided to improve their velocity.
Tell me more about that one.
Because I don't think the end goal should ever be improving velocity. Velocity doesn't have value. Velocity isn't working software. Velocity doesn't bring anything to a team. So if their entire goal was, we want to improve our velocity, my question would be why? Who are you improving that velocity for? Who's looking at your velocity that makes you feel like you have to make that number be higher?
Good point.
That is a great point.
It is.
And I won't pull on it too much. However, it does also bring to mind, well, what means that the velocity going up is improvement?
That's a great point, Quincy.
Yep.
I can produce, if I was producing crap before, I can produce more crap even better.
That's right.
I had somebody say that to me in one of the sessions, so that was good.
And so one last one that I will point out is just the notion that if we stop having this retrospective meeting, we can get more development work done. And that tends to be a really big anti-pattern that happens a lot with different teams. All right, so we'll go on to the next one.
I did want to point out one thing if I could on that. So without having the retro, and even though they went to MS Teams channel, there was never a improvement PBI that was generated that would help them correct issues or problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point, Dan. All right, COVID-19 hit and everyone in the world shifted to working remote. Bridget wanted to contribute value and made herself available to multiple teams. Day after day, she would have back-to-back meetings starting on the hour and ending on the hour. She found herself a few minutes late for meetings and worn out at the end of the day. In despair, she would have a glass of wine in the evening, fall asleep watching a Netflix series, and do it all again the next day. I spy.
Sustainability?
All right, you said sustainability? Okay,
Yes, sir.
tell me more about that.
Well, I mean, it says right here that she was worn out, and the whole idea, to me, sustainability means something that I can continuously repeat, and I still have a balance of work and family and life. And if at the end of my day, if I can only resort to a glass of wine and Netflix and crash on the couch, then that's not sustainability.
All right, so what would be a proposed solution in this scenario?
Have alternate hours where I have a meeting and then watch Netflix during the daytime, so I can. Obviously, schedule some off time from the meetings. Or to me, it would be that.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Thanks, Dan. Anyone else?
What hit me, Quincy, was that there seems to be Bridget's equating value with attending meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not always the case. And challenge why so many meetings are occurring, and try to learn to let the team self-organize if those meetings are necessary. Let the team, encourage the team to self-organize and have people attend some of the meetings that may be more important to them, and not every meeting, rather than her trying to be the savior or rescuer and do this. Because I do have one team where somebody mentioned that they're on calls all day. They have to work after hours to get their work done. And, I try to encourage, and the Scrum Master did a good job, encourage them, don't go to all the meetings, make sure that they're productive and they offer value. And, with a lot of large companies, meetings is how leadership tends to find themselves contributing value, because they're visible, they're there, they say, well, I was there for my team, but they really didn't say anything, and they just tied up, a lot of people's hours with making this meeting available or insisting people go when they weren't valuable.
Carl raised his hand
Thanks,
too.
Jen. Yep.
Yeah, that actually I can follow up on that comment as well about the contributing value. I guess my initial question was, what outcome was she trying to accomplish here by spreading herself extremely thin? Because with the amount of meetings that she ended up having, even if she isn't adding value during that meeting, she has no other time to try to come up with ways of improving those meetings, because she's worn out by the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly, Carl. That's a great point.
Yep.
Michael,
And,
you had your hand up?
Yeah, and Mike. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, just in general, as I've been working with this one, I think that if you look at the kind of science behind Slack, and the whole reason why sustainable pace is out there, is that you can get more productivity by working harder for short periods of time. And I think that as this all started, like, that was kind of accepted, like that we were kind of in crisis mode and we had to figure out what was going on, and maybe we were going to work a little longer hours or whatnot for a brief time. But I think that especially as Scrum Masters and coaches, from my perspective, now we're getting back into that, okay, not everything's on fire really anymore, and really kind of this is where our jobs are important, to constantly be checking in with your team, constantly be working with your product owners and your managers to say, okay, what's actually important now? Like, now we've put the fires out. How do we get back to prioritizing properly so that we're not stressing our teams out and we're not asking them to work 16-hour days, because they aren't going to be able to do that forever. And that's when you have that conversation with management to say, like, that's fine if that's what you're really expecting, but after a while, a 12-hour day is going to give you as much productivity as an 8, and you're paying somebody for nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. There is a law of diminishing returns after a point. So
and actually, to follow up on that comment, I think this is something that is going across now a lot more, is the time management aspect. We were trying to get people to have 50 or 55-minute meetings when we were in the office, because we already had to deal with elevator time, because we'd be going between towers. Now with people working from home, they are constantly sitting at their desk, and they barely have time for bio breaks. So we have actually implemented working agreements, basically blocking out time, one for lunch. Just block out your calendar, no meetings between 11:30 and 1 across the board. That way you can have, 1, time to catch up, 2, to have time with your family, and time to eat. We also require people to take breaks during the day. I actually have one person on one team, she told me she had 7 meetings in one day.
Oh, wow.
And I asked her, who was the organizer? And she said she was. So
I have to admit, I can relate a little bit to that. I have to admit. So
right. So so she didn't have time to really work on anything. I even summarize the meetings that she was attending, because she's moving right into another one.
Thanks. So we have 2 more I want to see if we can squeeze in before we get to our wrap up today. All right. So Team Deadpool was constantly missing the sprint goal and carrying user stories over the next sprint. QA would complain that they didn't have enough time to test due to dev completing late in the sprint. They decided to move all testing into a separate sprint. After several sprints, nothing improved because the amount of rework for devs increased dramatically. All right, so we'll time box this one to 2 minutes.
Michael's on it. Stage gate development.
Yeah, tell us about that one, Mike.
I mean, that's just the, development happens and you throw it over the wall, and now it goes to testing, and then they throw it back, and, it's not happening asynchronously, asynchronous. Yeah. So that's where you have your sprint burn down, is the nice straight line that just drops at the very end, because that's when all the testing happens.
Nice. All right, and what about you, Jim? You had a comment, siloed roles.
Yeah, siloed roles. I'm running into this now with a team that had the company I'm working with. They're extremely siloed. They still have, and much like Mike said, the stage gate development of the developer's code. The QA team doesn't want to test anything until it's finished. I'm trying to plant the seed and encourage them to pair the QA person with the developer, and for them to create their testing together with a developer as they're going through and developing their code. And it's a huge shift. And a couple of developers I'm trying to champion, because they've done test-driven development. They're interested in the pairing. Some of the traditional folks that are used to the old waterfall method aren't too warm to that. So it's it's kind of a battle. And but I did have success with a different team that I'm no longer working with in getting that pair happening. And they were starting to get through their test cycles a lot faster and delivering software earlier, because there were less gaps discovered later on in the process.
Nice. All right. So we have one more that we're going to do for the sake of time, and we'll move on. Since COVID-19 caused everyone to work remote, the DuckTales team has struggled to meet their sprint goals. They never work remote as a team, so to simplify things, the PO decided it would be best to do all the estimations himself. The team welcomed the idea to prevent sprint planning from taking so long during the Zoom meeting. After 3 sprints, the team has still struggled. What anti-patterns do you see, and how would you propose to resolve them?
Well, I think the big one that I see is obviously the team not doing the estimations themselves. And you know, that's kind of the big one. I would just look at ways to, there's plenty of tools that you can use to do online estimation. We use planningpoker.com. It's a great tool. I don't think you really have to change that. You can still do it effectively on an online, and it might take some time to get used to it, but like anything, if you more practice, you'll get better at it. So.
Yeah, I would agree. And not just the fact that the team wasn't doing their estimating, but the PO was. Having the business person come up with estimates. I actually ran into this problem recently. I had a PO say, well, I think it should only take 30 minutes. And I'm like, well, I don't recommend someone estimating who's not the expertise on the situation. And
Nice.
so that's one of the challenges I see with this.
All right.
Say one more. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Lack of commitment from the team. When somebody else does the estimates for them, it's not their estimates. They don't have a likelihood to commit to that.
Right.
Very true. Very true. And so this is our last exercise or kind of activity for today. There is one thing I would like to point out that spans across all 4 of these activities, which is an overarching anti-pattern of compromising the Agile values for the sake of thinking that something is going to be better some kind of way. So just would like to point that out and share that. And we will move along to our wrap up here.
Well, great conversation and a great way to wrap it up there, Quincy. First off, again, thank you all for joining us. Just to give you a heads up, if you go out to Eventbrite, you'll see our next couple of sessions. One is fun retrospective ideas for remote teams, and then that happens on April 30th, and then on May 7th, same time, same bat zone, noon to 1, we have effective sprint planning on for remote teams, and those are sort of some of the things that came out during our anti-pattern conversation. So these may be some great talks to have together to come up with ways to engage people differently. And that's the intention of the practice talks, is to go a little deeper on giving you some tools for your tool belt. You'll be receiving an email as our party gift with a copy of today's content, as well as please find our events out at agilethought.com/events for all upcoming events. A big ask, and we invite you to please help us out by, if you look in your chat window, you'll see a link to a retrospective for today's event. What we really value is any feedback you want to give us in terms of helping us improve, or if there was something that you were delighted with. But any ideas for future topics that you may be interested in having conversations about, please also put that in the retrospective. So I'll give you a couple moments to do that.
All right, folks, it's been a pleasure. You guys have a great rest of the weekend, and once again, be safe.
All right, you too. Thanks
so
a lot,
Jim.
Tim.
So I don't know if you want to go to the last slide to sort of end it all, just our pretty pictures again. There you go. So again, for Quincy, myself, and Sam, thank you for joining today's session. Have a great rest of your week.